Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie, and we're in the thick of my busy time of year. Now, we're busy out in the garden. It's planting time, a little tiny bit late this year. It's the last day in May. Usually by this time, I have my entire garden planted, all of my trees uncovered, everything ready to go, and I am just fully focused on my design business because this is the busiest time of year for my design business. But the weather and family events and all sorts of different things have put me a little bit behind. But that is good for you because I normally would not take the time to video taking down the winter protection for my figs and showing you what they look like underneath all that protection. Now I leave the protection really late into the year so we can make sure and miss any late frost. We did maybe about a week and a half ago hit into the 30s. And when you hit in the 30s, especially close to freezing, I actually think we might have hit freezing in some spots in my property. But when you hit that low and your plants have already leafed out, you can start getting damage. Now with my figs, I'm all about protection. I want fruit. I don't want any damage. So I take off the plastic, but I leave the bulk of the protection on them. That way they can poke their leaves up above the protection, get the sunshine, but the main part of the plant is still protected from any freezing temperatures. So let me show you the front yard. Let me show you the figs that I've already taken the protection off, show you what they look like, and then I'll show you how I take the protection off these figs. So we're in my front yard. These are my two figs on the south side of my house. These are the ones that get the most sun and the most heat. And I took the coverings off of them probably about 5 days ago. That's all the time I had. The front yard was all the time I had at that time. Didn't have time for the backyard. But this is what they look like right now. They had already leafed out while they were under cover. So they had a little bit of a head start. And they didn't get any of the frost damage from that last freeze. So let's look and see if there's any figs forming at all. Now, typically, I don't see figs form on my figs. I do get Braba crops, but the Braba crops seem to always die. I'm not sure why that is. They never fully ripen. But I don't tend to get figs. Okay, let's interrupt myself again. This is a Braba crop right here, and it will be interesting to see if that actually ripens. I'm not sure why I've never had them ripen, but Braba crops form on old wood. They form on last year's wood. And so they're your earlier crop. This is one of the main reasons why I've been protecting my figs. Number one, I want to have time for them to ripen. So we'll see if this one is able to ripen. But the main crop of figs ripens on the new growth. So we don't want late frost to kill back any of the new growth because that's where we're going to get our figs. I'm not seeing any right now, which is typical. And if I start seeing any figs form past the end of July, then that means they're not going to have time to ripen in our climate. Our first frost is generally speaking the end of September. Sometimes we'll get it mid-September. So all the figs that I have need to be able to ripen by mid-September to for sure be able to harvest a crop. If we get lucky, we may go into October and get a lot of figs ripening. So this is Chicago Hardy. This is its 5th year in the ground. We've got some really good, strong main branches down at the bottom. This tree has really established itself, and by the time it's done growing, it'll probably be about 8 feet tall. To keep it under cover, I have to prune it way back. And I have been working on trying to figure out when the best time is to prune it, and I think I've settled on August is the time of year that I'm going to go in and thin it out and take the height off of it so that we can actually fit it under the structure during the winter. Or maybe I've got to find a better way to make a larger structure. This down here is a black mission fig. I don't know if they give Braba crops or not. I'm not seeing any little figs on it. This is its 2nd year in ground. It's supposedly a more tender fig than the Chicago Hardy. I don't know if this one dies back to the ground, if it would grow back from the roots or not. So it's a special fig from a friend of mine, from her yard in California. So I'm always going to protect this fig and not take any chances with it because it's, to me, in my heart, an heirloom fig from a friend. This is another fig from an acquaintance. I didn't know her very well. She came to a garden tour of mine and she brought a fig cutting from her family's yard. And she said that fig I don't know if it was a cutting from one from her grandparents, but anyway, it's a fig that had grown for decades in Salt Lake. And it had grown for decades without cover and also had produced fruit for them. Now, this is, I think it's third year in ground. Yeah, I think it's its third year in ground. And I have protected it to this point. So I think what I might do this next year is take a couple of cuttings, make sure they're rooted out, and then leave it uncovered and see what happens with it. Because it would be really great if I had a couple of figs I didn't have to cover over the winter. Now, we're seeing a new little fig right here. This is one that I don't count as a Brava crop. I'm counting this as a main crop, and that should have time to ripen and should ripen for me. Right here is one that I'm going to count as a Brava crop. It's older, it's more mature, and we'll see what happens with it. This is the first year I think I have had it produce a Brava crop. Now the reason I say it's a Brava crop is look where it's forming. It is forming down on the old wood. This new little baby fig is forming, well, maybe it's forming on the old wood, I'm not sure. We'll see what happens with it. But I really don't expect to see a lot of figs forming for another week or so. And that's when we're going to see how many figs we're going to get this year. Another thing that I like to do is once my branches get 1.5 to 2 feet long, I like to go through on the new tips and pinch off the growth on the new tips to force side branches. And that seems to really, really help produce figs a little bit earlier for me. Because like I said, if they start forming after the end of July, then that means we're not going to have time for them to ripen. So this little fig right here is a Marseilles Black VS. We've got some growth coming on it. It is a newer fig. This is going to be its second year. Last year was its first year. I grew it from a cutting, and you can see how it was protected. Now, during the winter, I do put greenhouse plastic over the entire thing, including a covering on the top. And then so we can protect it in stages, the covering on the top is removable. So if we have warmer winter days, I can remove the top covering to air them out and still have the greenhouse plastic on the outside. And then I cover them back up when it gets cold again. So we removed the greenhouse plastic when it started getting warm in the spring. Now we're going to remove the rest of it. And it's quite a process. It's a labor of love, and we're going to film a few of them and then show you what they look like at the end. Now the first thing that I'm going to do is to take the chicken wire off the outside. The chicken wire on the outside is just to contain the hay and to give an area for me to put the greenhouse plastic around it. I wanted to keep the plastic away from the tree. I also wanted to keep the straw away from the tree. And so that's why I put the insulation in the center. Plus the insulation in the center gives the tree room to breathe, and it gives it that extra added insulation. So let's take the chicken wire off. And I actually do save all of these parts and pieces to reuse year after year. Next, I take out the supports for the chicken wire. And then the straw is going to go in my raised beds. I also have a pile next to my compost pile where it can weather all summer. I use all of it to mulch my raised garden beds. Now, I purchased the straw at IFA, and I think this is a really good way, just in case it had some of those lingering pesticides on it. It's a way for it to age and to have the pesticides leach out before I use it on my garden beds. And the pesticides, if there are any, and I've never really noticed any problems with it, they're not going to harm the trees. So let's get the straw off, and I'll show you what insulation I use in the center. Now this is the insulation that I use. This is good for, I've been using this year after year. it lasts for a long time, and it provides perfect insulation for my plants. Now let's bring you a little bit closer and show you what this little tree looks like. So now this little tree is free to continue to grow. We're not going to see a brave crop off of it. We see all the little fruits that formed last year that did not have time to ripen before the last frost. And then we see all the leaves on the ground from it. Now, when I put the insulation on this, I put it on in early September because I want to protect my trees from dying due to early fall frosts. Now we can get early fall frosts in September. We've seen them in September. Average is the beginning of October. And my fig trees have not usually had time to go dormant by then. They end up going dormant near the middle to the end of October. And when I say frost, I'm not talking about 32 degrees. I'm talking about the hard freezes, actually. We can get hard freezes down to 18 degrees. You know, we'll go from like 60 degrees down to 18 degrees in a single day. And that's enough to kill back all of the branches and kill it to the ground. And I don't want that to happen. So I have to put the protection on before the trees go dormant. So you do see a lot of the leaves from last year on the ground. And that's what also helped. And that's also why I make it so that I can take the tops off the greenhouse plastic. That way the protection is open so the trees can still photosynthesize, gain energy, and get cold enough to try and go dormant before actual winter sets in. So now that we've gone through step by step how I take apart my plants, let me take apart the rest of my fig trees. We'll talk to you about the varieties that I have and show you what they look like under their covers. I don't think I'm going to film this because I don't have a lot of battery. You saw how I've done it, but I will show you where I'm going to put my straw. So these are my newly planted tomato beds. And we actually put some grass clippings on them to help mulch and to break down, give it a little bit of added nitrogen. Now we're going to put the straw over the top, and then I'll show you where I put the rest of it after we're done mulching these. So now we have these beds nicely mulched. So it's going to hold water, regulate the temperature of the soil in the beds because this area gets really, really hot, and it's going to break down and add organic matter to the soil. So this is my straw pile right here. This was from the front yard. That was a lot of straw because we had some big trees mulched in the front yard. Now, what I think I might do is add a little blood meal, water it down, and let it start breaking down over the summer. We'll use it to mulch the beds throughout the year as we need it, but also it's going to be put over the beds for the fall. And then last year's straw, the bit that I didn't use that overwintered, that is actually decomposing right now in the compost bin. Got a little bit more in these. And it's completely used. No waste using straw. I love using straw. Now I do have people ask if using straw mulch causes weeds, and you do actually get little bits of straw grass growing in your garden beds. These are very easy to remove. They're not perennial, they're annual, and the seeds don't seem to last from year to year. So I only get the straw growing, very sparsely in the areas where new straw is put. This right here is not a weed. This is just a strawberry that got covered up over the winter. Well, we got it finished. I'm a little bit worse for wear. It was a long, hot day. It was in the 80s, which is really not that hot. But when you're used to the 70s, it feels hot. But anyway, we got it finished. Let's go show you my figs, and we'll talk a little bit about the varieties. Now, the sun isn't the best. It's the evening. It's about 7 p.m., and it's shining on everything. But this right here is my Slovatsky pomegranate. I know it's not a fig, but I wanted to show you anyway, because if you look down in there, we've got our first flower of the season. This is its third year. It's never fruited, and I'm hoping that we actually get fruit this year. So as a reminder, this is Marseilles Black VS. It's a darker fig, and it's one that I started from a cutting. This is one that I purchased. It's a Negrone, which could also be a Violette de Bordeaux. And we actually have figs on this one. They're a little worse for wear because of being under the protection. But we've got 3 or 4 figs on here. Now these are Brava crop. We'll see if they actually ripen. But we fertilized and watered these, and I'm hoping to see an explosion of growth here. Now this is one that I started from a cutting last year. It's 1 year old. and this was its first winter, and it is an Italian honey. And we've actually got Brava crops on this one too. We have 2 or 3 little figs. There might be one other one. Yeah, there's another one right here, 3. So I'm really excited about that. This will be the first time I've tasted figs off this one. This is a green fig, I think. Well, actually, it's not my only green one. I have another green one. That's this one that I got from One Green World. There are no Brava crops on this one that I've seen yet, anyway. But this one is an Olympian. It's a green fig, and supposedly it has kind of a peachy overtone to the flavor. So I'm excited to see how that one tastes, and hopefully we get fruit this year. This is my Ronde Bordeaux. Every year it quadruples in size. It's a very vigorous fig. It gets huge, and it does produce a lot of figs, but it seems to produce them pretty late, and so we usually end up with a lot on the tree and not a lot ripen. I usually get about 3 or 4 that ripen. So hopefully this year we'll see if we get, any more, we'll see if we get more figs that ripen. This will be its 3rd year in ground, I think, maybe even its 4th. And I did not see any Brava crop on this one. So that's what my figs look like. I will give you an update mid-year when it's time to pinch them. Like I said in the beginning, I pinch the tips once the new growth gets about 1.5 feet long. That way we force side shoots and we end up getting more figs. So we'll update you on what they look like at that time. And until then, I hope you have a wonderful garden adventure.